Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be hosting or interviewing or talking with cybersecurity guru Adam Levin, who is the founder of the What the Hack podcast. Adam has a lot of experience in the cybersecurity space. We're going to talk to him about his background, the reasons that he launched his podcast, some interesting stories, and then we're going to talk about the current threat landscape. But before we get to all that, let's say hi to Adam. Adam, how are you today?
Hey, Mark, how are you? Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for taking time out and coming on Secure Talk. Where are you located?
I am currently grilling in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh my gosh, you are a glutton for punishment.
It's a little toasty here. The other day was 113. One day it was 117. So it is the Wild West.
I stopped by Phoenix one time. We were on a motorhome trip, and friends said, "Hey, you got to come by Phoenix," because we were on our way from Joshua Tree to Prescott, which is all relatively high altitude.
Sure.
And they said, "Come by, we'll have a pool party." And this was in August, and it was not a pool party; it was a warm bath party. It was so bad.
There's no question. At night, you jump in the pool. You say, "I'm going to be refreshed," and you end up being in a hot tub that wasn't supposed to be a hot tub.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. And I'm not going to get any sympathy from you because I'm actually from Seattle, which is nice and cool, but I'm down in Salt Lake City right now, and it's like in the high 90s. And I was going to complain about that, but I think I'll just keep my complaints to myself because you're living on the edge right there. So
grilling on the edge. Yep,
grilling on the edge. Yeah, definitely. Hey, before we talk about your podcast, maybe you could just give us, a little idea about your background in cybersecurity and some of the work that you've done.
Oh, sure. Well, I trained as an attorney. I did it because I wanted to be in politics. I wanted to be a legislator. And I was considered.
So wait a minute. You live in Phoenix in the summertime, and you want to be a politician. This is telling me something about your threshold for punishment.
Can you imagine? Yeah. And those were the days. I mean, we're talking late 60s, where it was really an interesting time to be involved in politics and all things political. And I ran for Congress in 1974. Was not successful, but became Consumer Affairs Director for the state of New Jersey, where I served for 5 years, and ran again in 1982 for Congress, close but no cigar. So I did that. I was very involved, for years in the whole consumer education, consumer protection area. 1993, I started one of the first online credit education information product and services site called credit.com. As a matter of fact, we were so new and early to the game because it was such a new and early game that we managed to swap an $1,800 hard drive for the domain credit.com. In 2003, I started a company called Identity Theft 911 because we started to see more serious indications that identity theft was being a problem. And no one was doing it the way that my partners and I thought it should be done, which is where resolution services would be the core, as opposed to it simply being viewed as an additional revenue stream for people who wanted to sell monitoring programs. Over the years, it morphed from Identity Theft 911 to IDT 911. And then reporters said, well, are you an alarm company or are you a phone company? And we said, well, it's time to get a new name. We went global. And so we became Cyber Scout. And I sold Cyber Scout a year ago to Santique, who was eventually bought later in the year by TransUnion. So I'm kind of steeped in the credit and identity theft world. And of course, as identity theft morphed to cyber, our company morphed to cyber, and we were involved in forensics, in incident response, incident preparedness. So I've kind of covered the field on all of that. And then wrote a book called Swiped back in 2015, How to Protect Yourself in a World Full of Scammers, Phishers, and Identity Thieves, where we talked about not only identity theft issues, but cyber issues, and then started this podcast in 2021, and it's grown significantly. It's very exciting.
No, it's impressive because I think you already have over 50 episodes and you just started a little over a year ago. So that's very impressive. Hey, before we jump into the podcast though, I mean, you mentioned a couple things. One is it's interesting because a lot of your experience is on like the consumer side, right? Versus going into an enterprise and selling them some kind of, detection prevention platform or tool. You mentioned remediation services versus monitoring. And I think especially on the enterprise size, monitoring is huge.
Yep.
And when it comes with individuals, I'm assuming with like, credit agencies, they will monitor and see if there's, some type of kind of strange activity. But maybe you could just explain a little bit about what are the type of resolution services and how does that work?
Oh, sure. And actually, over the years, we became a company involved with education, remediation, identity management, monitoring, breach preparedness, breach response, and forensics. So we ended up in all the fields. Initially, the whole identity theft area, you have to go back to the psychology of the identity theft area. When we started back in 2003, the business was viewed as the victim. Generally, it was a bank, and consumers were viewed as maybe collateral damage, but maybe it was their fault. So as a consumer, you were guilty till proven innocent when it came to things identity theft related. And that's why remediation became such an important part of the process because, people were involved in certain ways in doing monitoring programs and selling you all sorts of other things. But when it came to the remediation part, it was like, well, here's some tip sheets. Good night. Good luck. And
months later, still no remediation.
That's correct. Hours later, your life has passed you by. You're totally economically upheaved, and it has tremendous psychological downsides to it. My friend Eva Velasquez over at the Identity Theft Resource Center, they do an aftermath study every year where they interview victims of identity theft and people. From their stories, you get an idea of really what pain and agony people have gone through. And we're not talking about just, oh, golly, someone stole my credit card or someone got my ATM information and crawled in my bank account, but I got them. No, we're talking about people who are victims of new account identity theft, where people gaily went about the countryside, opening accounts and charging up all kinds of horrendous numbers and then disappearing. So the victim was stuck with that, to medical identity theft, which is where someone steals your information for the purpose of getting medical treatment or whatever in your name, which could be very serious, especially if they get into the same medical facility that you've been involved with. If their information could get commingled with your information. We're talking about victims of child identity theft. We're talking about where identity theft occurred, for example, during COVID, where billions of dollars of unemployment benefits were stolen and people who desperately needed it had to wait additional time in order to get it, and they were destroyed economically. We're talking about criminal identity theft, where I don't know if you ever saw the movie Identity Thief, but in that case, I mean, and it's true. Your information is used, crimes are committed, and the trail of breadcrumbs leads back to you. We worked on a case a few years back. A teacher was driving his family through the Midwest, gets pulled over for a busted taillight, realizes that his car is surrounded by guys with guns, thrown on the ground, handcuffed in front of his kids, hauled off to jail, and needed help in order to convince the judge that he was not the person who had committed the crime. So they're very serious ramifications of identity theft and cyber incidents. And so, that's important. Remediation is critically important. And Identity Theft 911, which became Cyber Scout, was one of the preeminent and first movers in the space of identity theft remediation.
Thanks for that overview. That's very helpful and informative. And I just want to go just a little bit farther on this topic.
Sure.
So, what are some of the key steps in remediation? Obviously, probably working with a platform such as Cyber Scout and the other the previous names for that service. But what are some of the key things that that your remediation partner can do for you?
Well, they can pretty much do everything for you. You can do it yourself, which is like, are you going to go out on a battlefield having never been trained and then try to be an effective defender? The answer is probably not. Um, with the whole remediation process, if you do it yourself, you have to contact the credit reporting agencies. You have to keep files. You have to contact your creditors. You have to contact, depending upon how pervasive the problem is, government agencies. You may even want to, have yourself flagged by the IRS, which to me is fairly terrifying on a variety of levels. It's trying to get the FBI or folks in law enforcement to get interested in your case. The FBI, for instance, has been very effective in these areas, are getting far more effective, but they need big cases. I mean, they have a
Yeah.
certain amount of resources they can dedicate, just like the Secret Service. Local law enforcement, and I know this because I worked for the FBI, helping to train police officers and heads of police departments, is that, and they admit it. They said, look, we're under-resourced, underfunded, and undertrained. And I remember when we first started Identity Theft 911, the first conference we went to was the IAFCI conference, which is the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators. And we sat down with the FBI and the Secret Service, and they said, look, these are things that we can't go into someone's home and sit there with them and help them through an identity incident. We have neither the time nor the resources. Not that we don't want to, but we can't. Just like I spoke to a sheriff from North Carolina who said there was an elderly person in the area of his jurisdiction that he went into their home. He felt so badly, he spent the entire day on the phone trying to help them gather together information, talking to creditors, talking to the credit reporting agencies. And he said, I didn't have the time. I did it. I didn't have the time for it. And it's not like we can't do this for everybody. So you're dealing with under-resourced, undertrained, underfunded organizations trying to deal with things that are really beyond their area of expertise, and they should be doing what they do. So that's why having a third-party organization that has a good reputation, that's been involved in this area, and there are a number of very good ones, working for you, and you can get to them, for instance, through your insurance company, through certain financial institutions, credit unions more than banks. Credit unions are more member-centric, and through, believe it or not, employee benefits programs. Now, a significant percentage of employers are offering identity protection services and remediation services and the like as part of their either employer-paid or voluntary benefits program. Because they figured out a couple things. Number one, if you're an employee and you're a victim of identity theft and you're struggling with it, you're not going to be very productive. That's not good for you. It's not good for them. Number two, if your credentials are breached, your user ID and password, and if you happen to use, as over half the people in America do, the same user ID or credentials for websites, your employer could be vulnerable as a result of your vulnerability. So it is in their interest as well as your interest to do it.
Yeah, so you just answered my next question, which is who pays for this, and that is a really kind of nice trend that that you have these options like insurance, the credit unions, employee benefits. That kind of gives me makes me feel a little more optimistic, because it used to be, like you said, you're just out there trying to battle all this and go and navigate through this all on your own while you're still working full time and taking care of your kids and and doing all that. And I mean, just that low level or high level stress that would just go on for months. So good for you for helping to kind of solve that problem or create a solution for it. Let me ask you. Let's talk now about what the hack. what was the rationale to create a podcast?
Well, first of all, I've done a lot of media over the years. As my co-host Bo Friedlander used to be the editor-in-chief of Air America, and so we happen to love the environment. Podcasting is a little bit of a new twist for us, although we're both podcast freaks. We like them. And secondly, it's really, how do you continue the mission of educating people and providing a platform which is accessible and takes an issue where for a lot of people it's sort of mysterious. When I started in the credit world, when you talked about credit, it was like this strange black cloud that was following you. That's why when we had credit.com, we came up with the concept of credit is your friend. When I came up with that, people said, what are you, out of your mind? Credit's not your friend. I said, well, yes, it is. If you treat credit like you would treat a friend, if you're there for it, it will be there for you. But that means you have to build it, nurture it, manage it, and protect it.
Yes.
Yep. And so the concept of the podcast is really, we created what we call a shame-free zone. Because the only way that we will get through this is we have to all be in this together, because we're up against a very formidable enemy, folks that are creative, sophisticated, and persistent, and folks that are counting on the fact that we all have day jobs, right? I mean, we have jobs, we raise families, we're involved in philanthropic activities, we're getting educated. That's our day job. But to a hacker, a scammer, an identity thief, we are their day job. And there's a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So how do you create a situation where you say to people, look, you're not the only person in the world this happened to. So do not, under any circumstances, feel embarrassed about this, because these guys are good and they're waiting for a moment of distraction, and we are all distracted. So let's talk about it. Let's try to put sort of a little bit of a lighthearted tone on it, because I found, for instance, when I was head of consumer affairs and I made 1,500 speeches over those 5 years, that if you're just going to drone on about these are the facts and these are the problems and these are the protections, you're going to lose everybody.
Right.
But if you intersperse some humor with it, people will pay more attention because they're listening for the next line. And lo and behold, as you deliver the next line, they're learning something. And so, we're all in this together. We would like to believe that business and government is providing the protections that we need so we can rest a little easy, but they're not. They're trying, but they're not. And also, we bear a responsibility as consumers, because the ultimate guardian of the consumer is the consumer, because nobody knows what we do better than we know what we're doing. And therefore, the point of the show is, how do we arm consumers with information, as well as ways to understand the threat landscape, what the red flags are, and what best practices are?
Awesome. I like the idea of a no shame zone where people can share stories. When I grew up, when I was growing up, I would listen to my grandparents or other family members and talk about, different accidents or different, bad things that had happened to people. And the whole idea was to learn from that. Hey, never put your hand into that equipment when you're wearing a glove, because the equipment could grab onto your glove, right?
That's right.
Never, go underneath the car unless you have it up on blocks. I mean, simple stuff like that. But when you're a little kid, you learn from that and you hear from it. And if nobody's telling these stories and something bad happens to you, if you get hacked, I mean, you're like, oh God, but you need to share that information. And when it comes now, it went to the cyber threat landscape. You see all kinds of, social engineering things. And, I'm sure you've seen the ones where they get an email from the boss saying, hey, I need you to go out and buy these gift cards. It's urgent. Or, hey, I need you to do this transaction. It's urgent. And they're, like you said, these cyber actors are doing this 24/7. They have their technique down and everything. And you're just like trying to, get on with your life. And you get this message from your boss, you think, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go do this. But if you hear the story a few times, like you say, you're like, hi, wait a minute, I've heard about this. So that is excellent.
The whole point there is, oftentimes people go, well, these are just common sense things. And the answer is yes, it is. And it's the whole point of take a minute And then you know what? If your boss sends you a note saying, you have to do this right away, the first thing you do is either get out of your chair, at least in the old days when humans worked in the same building,
Right.
and get in the elevator, get on the escalator, or walk around the corner and say, hey, boss, I don't want to be a pain in the butt, but did you just send me a note asking me to wire $50,000 to so-and-so? Because all too often your boss may look at you and go, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So oftentimes it's the simple thing of never trust, always question, always verify.
Just slow down, man. Yeah,
That's it.
exactly. Yeah. So let me, I mean, because you've had over 50 different episodes. Give me some idea of some of your more interesting guests or episodes or topics.
Oh, we've had everyone from our first episode, which was one of our fun ones when he was trolling QAnon sites. And he went from sort of trolling to being annoying, and some of the QAnon folks were not too happy with him, and they basically sent him a picture of a scary clown and then sent him a picture of himself and said, we're watching. So to people who were victims of catfishing, people who were simply going online to play a mahjong game with friends, and as that was going on, someone was trying to get in their computer. They were about to become a victim of a technology scam or a bank scam, to people whose Instagram accounts just suddenly disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
We had one interesting episode. It was a combination. It wasn't catfishing per se, but it was a dating site issue, and it could have been that one of the people that she was dating, who happened to have a cyber company, suddenly figured out that she was communicating with other people while she was communicating with him, and he may have been one of the quote other people that she was communicating with as a test, along with traditional catfishing scams where we had a woman on who was really funny, and we had to do a lot of beeping because she spoke like a sailor. We love her to death. And she was talking about the fact that she was approached by somebody who appeared to be a well-credentialed, semi-famous doctor who, as part of his retirement, was now opening a clinic in the Middle East. He had a LinkedIn profile. He sure looked right. And then all of a sudden, he started asking her for money.
Mm-hmm.
We had a CIO on who his company was a victim of a ransomware attack, but yet he and his team had put a lot of protections in place, and they were able to fight it back. We had a comedian on, really funny guy, who his friends called him while he was driving and said, weird stuff is going on with your Twitter and your Instagram account. I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, weird songs and lyrics. And all of a sudden the phone rings and he's driving, and he picks up the phone and he hears, hi, I'm your hacker.
Oh, wow.
He goes, what? And he said,
it's nice that the hacker introduced himself, you know.
Yeah. So he said, I'm talking to a hacker.
hacker.
Yeah. He said, I'm talking to a hacker. And I said to him, how old are you? And he said, well, I'm not 12 and I'm not 14. So he said, you're not 13, really? And then the guy said, okay, let's get down to business. Now, if you want your accounts back, you have to pay me. So he said, well, how much do I owe you? Fearing some horrendous number. And he hears the voice go, well, let's see. Based on everything I see about you and all the information, $100. He said, I'm only worth $100? And then the young fellow says, I'm looking through your accounts and I see that you have Falafel Phil, a Disney character on your page. What's that all about? What do you have to do with Falafel Phil? And our friend Dan said, I am Falafel Phil. And he went, oh no. Oh my gosh, you're Falafel Phil? Listen, I had a bad childhood, and during my childhood, the only thing that kept me going was Falafel Phil. I love you, man. So Dan said, well, does that mean I get my account back without paying? And the kid said, no.
Oh
but
man,
but I'm willing to become head of security for you. I'll protect you. So
kids these
uh,
days. That guy's got some a very entrepreneurial spirit. Kind of misguided, but give him credit for yeah
and
the
we've had
initiative.
yeah, we've had artists on. We've had somebody who's a famous sunglass designer who his Instagram account went down, and the overwhelming majority of his business was done through Instagram, and he was put through hell. And it's like he it took forever to get it back, and I'm not even sure he got it back.
So
Um,
these were just somebody compromised their credentials. They just got in and then changed the password, so he couldn't re-access.
right.
Okay.
And then you go through this whole process, and frankly, you have a better shot of getting through the United States government than you do of getting through to Facebook, or they just don't care. I mean,
No,
unless you say, I have about 50,000 I really wanted to spend advertising with you. All of a sudden, it's wait, let's see if we can help you here.
that's
Um,
funny.
because
Hey,
it's almost impossible to get through. We've also had Jordan Harbinger on the show, who's quite a famous guy. Um, we've had artists
mhm.
again. We had one who was a songwriter, was approached by somebody for her to write a song for them, and they sent her more money than she had asked for, and then said, "Oh, by the way, the check was issued by mistake by one of the divisions of my company, and if you could send me back the overage." And that's because it was a fake check.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was, one of those overpayment scams. So,
Let me ask you, in terms of the compromised credentials, what are your takeaways in terms of how to prevent something like that?
well, sometimes you can't, for the simple reason that we're living in a world where breaches have become the third certainty in life behind death and taxes.
Hmm.
And as a result, all of your information is out there. I mean, if you just think about the Equifax breach, all your information is out there. And the problem is that, if you go to a site like Have I Been Pawned, that's
Yeah.
PWNED, you know about that one,
Yeah.
that you will be surprised and chagrined to find that oftentimes many websites that your user ID and password are on, and in some cases they have not been protected, they're sitting in plain text, have been exposed and breached and compromised. And you suddenly realize that you are using the same, if not similar, user ID and password. So therefore, hackers and scammers who get that kind of information simply take your credentials and then use it. And if you go, well, how did you know where I'm working? Did you ever hear of LinkedIn?
Right.
Uh, and then, of course, based on the story that you told earlier, uh, you work at LinkedIn, or you work at a company, and that's listed on LinkedIn, and they go, and here's everyone else that works at that company.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it's like you can get a list of who works there, what their titles are, what they do, and it helps a scammer uh, be able to communicate with you more effectively as if it's the real deal, because they know who the person is and they masquerade as that person.
So better password hygiene, definitely. How about, some type of multi-factor or two-factor authentication?
Oh, absolutely. And let me get into so when we wrote the book Swiped, we came up with a framework for consumers that people should be using, because a lot of this, if you just think about it en masse, it is overwhelming.
Hmm.
So what we call it, Bo and I, the three M's. How do you minimize your risk of exposure, reduce your attackable surface in a world where you are being tracked by billions of Internet of Things devices?
Hmm.
Uh, to how do you effectively monitor so that as quickly as possible you have a problem, to how do you manage the damage? So minimize, monitor, manage. So as part of minimizing, number one, good password hygiene, which means you certainly don't use silly passwords or easily decipherable passwords. The only problem is you could have the most indecipherable password in the world, but once it's discovered, it's out there.
Right.
So that's why using a password manager that can create complicated passwords, and you can have different passwords for every website, as opposed to sharing the same password on your universe of accounts. Multi-factor authentication, Uh, it's not bulletproof, but it's certainly a lot better than just simply using passwords. Two, being very careful about clicking links or opening attachments, unless you're absolutely sure who they come from. And even then, it's possible that the person that sent it to you, they received something that was malware ridden, and they thought it was pretty cool, and they sent it on to you. And it's so you have a frame of reference, but unfortunately, you become a victim to not simply downloading every cool app you hear about. Because if you get an app from a third-party site other than Apple and Google, and even if you get some apps from Google and even recently a couple from Apple, it could be malware laden, or it could be a trick app created by hackers in order to scam information from you. At least Apple and Google do a lot more research before something goes into their stores than other sites. Two, here's one that people don't necessarily think about. When you set up questions and answers, security questions and answers, lie like a superhero.
Okay. Actually, you know what? I've never thought about that. But I always have felt weird about giving people my mother's maiden name, my high school mascot, well, whatever it is, my first pet's name, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm just giving. So I know where you're going with this, but go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, because the important thing is, as you know, most of the facts of our lives are out there on social media. Sometimes it has nothing to do with us. It's a friend that could say something about us, and it gets picked up because scammers are trolling. They are following people on social media. So if you went to Ridgefield High, tell them you went to Sky High. If your mother's name is Smith, tell them their maiden name is Jones. Because the truth of the matter is, it's not as if when you give security questions and answers that you're being investigated for the purpose of getting a national security clearance. These websites don't care. All they care about is whatever answer you gave them is the answer you give them.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. It's interesting. I actually, in the middle of the night last night, I woke up in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep, so I got up and did some work. And one of the things I had to do was a notary. And remember, it used to be with a notary, you'd have to print out whatever you wanted and run out to the local notary office and pay them to do it, and it would take time and whatever. Now you can do notaries online digitally. You fill out some questions, they scan your ID, and then somebody comes on and looks at the documents, verifies your identification, and then they notarize it remotely. So, which is a pretty cool service. Yeah. But before I could get to the service point, they had actually I think it was 9 security questions, and they said you need to get at least 6 of these correct. And these were not things that I'd given them, but they would give me 4 different addresses and say, which of these addresses have you previously lived at or had some relation to? A, B, C, D, or none of the above, right? And then they would do, which car did you own this year? And it's amazing. I'm like, I forgot that I had that car back in 2002. How did they know this? And so like you said, that information's all out there, and it's kind of scary.
Well, yeah, it is. And usually they buy it from credit reporting agencies, as they're called out of wallet questions. Sometimes they'll say, what was the actual mortgage payment that you made on this house?
Yeah.
Or your current mortgage payment or your current lease payment. And a lot of people say, I don't remember. What do you want from me? And then you end up getting, you feel
like you're the criminal here.
Yeah. Well, that's like, with password managers. And I'm a fan of password managers, right? Is that you only have to remember 2 things: where you put it, if it's like USB form, and what its password is. And I once had it where I had a password manager. I could not remember the password, and I went and they always say forgot password, and then they were supposedly sending me hints, but the hints never showed up, so I couldn't give them an answer because I couldn't tell what the hint was.
It's kind of one of those maddening loops. I actually got locked out of my iPhone once, and it was just one of these things. I've had the same kind of, code for years. And for whatever reason, I was getting one number off, but the thing is, once you get like 3 times wrong, then it locks you out for 3 minutes or whatever it is. And then if you get it wrong again, it locks you out for 10 minutes. And then the anxiety level goes up. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to get this time. And I was locked out for an hour. And I was actually driving through Phoenix that time, and I had to pull over at a shopping mall in northern Phoenix, and just sit there and just calm down. An hour later, because like when you're locked out of your iPhone, you don't exist anymore.
It feels like Terminator, man against the machine.
Exactly.
I had that last
go
night.
ahead.
I was at a restaurant with my wife, and she apparently had changed the case on her iPhone, and it looked exactly like mine. So I'm trying to set the alarm for today, and I set the alarm, and then all of a sudden it goes to, the digits you have to press again. So I'm pressing the digits, it's not working. Press it again, it's not working. Now I'm getting into a panic, and then I suddenly realize my phone is in my pocket, and she's looking at me like, if you lock me out of my phone, I'm going to kill you. So it's like,
I know that look. Yes.
Yes.
I'm giving it to myself sometimes as well. So let's jump tracks again here. Back to the podcast.
Yeah.
What are some of your biggest lessons learned in terms of running a successful podcast?
Well, one of them is that as wonderful as you think your podcast is, and how you think that the entire world should be sending all sorts of kudos your way, and you're sitting there going, I don't have any ratings. Where did the ratings go? So it's a slow process. Even if you're generating an enormous volume, your sense of what kind of reaction that you're going to get from people is often very different from the reaction or lack thereof from your listeners. But yet you're generating a lot of real listeners, and you're tracking to see that people are coming back and listening. It's growing.
Well, you let me cut in for a second, because you must be doing something right. I'm just taking a look at your Apple Podcast reviews, and you have over 113 ratings with a nice 4.6 kind of average. So you must be doing something right there, Adam.
Well, yeah, no. We're excited by the way that it's building, and we've had some really nice comments. A couple of people that have been quite honest about how they feel, which may not be. You read it and you go, really? But
it's like in that Jerry Maguire scene where he says, like, I don't think we need to go brutal honest, or we we can be honest without the brutal part, Yeah.
Or that's like in the movie Interstellar, where he's talking to the computer and he goes, "What's your honesty setting at?" No, at 90. Said, "Yeah, let's set it at 65, Lars." But no, what I find about podcasting also is that it's very important to be as current as possible. So the whole concept of, let's bank a lot of episodes, you really can't you can for the evergreen parts, but still for the, the parts where you're trying to make it relevant. It's, you really have to, stay up on things. And the world that you and I both live in is that things are changing like minute by minute sometimes.
That's for sure. One of the challenges that I have now, which I didn't have before when I first started Secure Talk, is that I get guest requests. It used to be for me that the biggest challenge was finding qualified guests to come on the podcast.
Yes.
I would say in this, I don't know, last year and a half, 2 years, I get several requests a week, to the point sometimes it's really hard, because I want to be as inclusive as possible. And cybersecurity really is a super broad space, or there are so many different topics that you can actually go really deep on. I mean, we've been talking primarily about like the consumer side, but there's, when you get into enterprise, there's things like intrusion detection systems, anomaly detection, DLP. There's the compliance side, there's DevOps, there's just so many different areas, right? I mean, there's all these different subject matter experts, and I want to be as inclusive as possible. But it's a challenge sometimes, because like you said, you want to be up to date, and if you have a guest on and you're not really up to date on their topic, it can be kind of challenging. I mean, how do you manage that?
Well, we have there are three of us, that Bo, Travis, and I, and we spend a lot of time reading reports. We have contacts in law enforcement agencies, and a good friend of mine is a former chief of staff of the U.S. Secret Service. So if I ever have or an issue where I don't understand it, I can call him and he can get me up to speed. We also have worked with white hat hackers and gray hat hackers, and they're great resources for these kinds of things. I have one friend who, every time I call him, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going to Brooklyn Criminal Court." I said, "They got you?" He said, "No, I'm testifying, dude. I'm working for the FBI." So, we have these wonderful sources of income. It's not quite like Brian Krebs, where he has, Russian gangs reporting into him in an effort to torpedo other Russian gangs. But, so we try to stay with that. But you did mention something, and I thought maybe we could briefly go through this. Unfortunately, I've got about 7 minutes left, only because we ran up against a deadline, which, and I'm happy to to come back and talk more about this even today, depending upon your time, but is on the business side, right? Because the same 3 M's that we apply to the consumer side can be applied to the business side. And in a lot of ways, it's the same: multi-factor authentication, password protocols, employee training is absolutely critical. Bruce Schneier, who's one of the lions in this world that you and I live in, he made a great comment among all his other great comments, which is, if you think that throwing a lot of money at technology is the answer to security problems, you don't understand the technology and you don't understand security. And it's really about, how do you build a culture of privacy and security in an organization, so that everyone from the mailroom to the boardroom and back again to the mailroom, or if you're working from home, including members of your family, how do people from the living room to your office to the kitchen understand that we're in this together, that you need to have a psychology that we all have a stake in the ownership of the privacy and security in our organization, because any mistake by any one person can ultimately bring down an entire company and impact potentially millions of consumers. So it's that education and philosophy. It's about segmenting data. It's about keeping data only as long as you need it, in order to protect your organization and anyone that does business with your organization. I could do a lot more on the first M, but then there's monitoring, which is, you need to be monitoring your systems constantly, everything from third-party penetration testing to internal monitoring as well, but understanding with your CISO and your technology guys that you're only as secure as you were 38 seconds ago, because you could be great and you take a victory lap, and 2 minutes later, somebody somewhere clicks on the wrong link, and you're not monitoring your systems, and you don't notice data extraction anomalies over time. And all of a sudden, you get the call that you never wanted to get, either from Brian Krebs or the government or the bank or the hacker. So monitoring is absolutely mandatory. And then the last is managing the damage, which means you can't just say to your IT guys, "Well, can you fix it?" And they go, "Yeah, don't worry about it." that doesn't work. You've got people to notify. You've got call trees you have to follow. You've got protocols if you operate in more than one state. In this country, we have, at the moment, 54 jurisdictions with separate breach notification laws. There's no national breach notification law yet. You've got to work with outside communication people, inside communication people, the legal department, the HR department, the technology department. This is a group effort, including getting ready for the possibility that something like this could happen, where you red team things and then you train your people at your company as they drill sailors on a nuclear submarine, so that once the call goes out, "Houston, we got a problem," is people respond almost based on muscle memory, is that everyone knows what they have to do. And the way that a company responds to an incident involving a breach is a defining moment in the history of that company. And it can either be a bad experience or an extinction level event.
Well, I think that, those are two critical things you mentioned. One is security has to be part of everybody's culture as an individual, as a group, as a company, as an organization. It's everybody's responsibility. And I think that's a massive evolution, because just a few years ago, it was assumed that somebody in IT would be taking care of security. And now we realize that the biggest threat vector is us, individuals, human beings. And we all need to be kind of alert and aware. And it's everybody's responsibility. Just like I think that in any organization or any company, the profitability, the bottom line should be, everybody should have some kind of, stake in that. The other thing that you basically said is, if you do, if you are breached, you've been hacked, don't call an audible and do some kind of ad hoc running around going like, oh, we got to do this, we got to do that. No, you have to have a playbook in place. And
Yep.
the playbook has to have every single step, and so like you said, I like the what you said is it should be almost like muscle memory, where you just go through it. In fact, good organizations, they'll run kind of, scenarios and put their team through it. And it takes time, but God, the ROI on that time in the case of an actual breach is, unlimited.
No, and absolutely, you can lose customers, you can lose faith with partners, business partners. You can have the ultimate regulators of the American economic system, class action lawsuit attorneys coming after you, along with regulators coming after you. It can suck up all of your time dealing with that, or you can have a plan in place so you can continue to operate. But first, you have to know, where did the problem happen? How did it happen? How fast can you fix the problem? And, we all like to say things like, well, backup, upgrade, and update. That's fine. But the issue then is, once you've done all of that, how fast can you get your systems back up and running again?
Right.
Because you could have all the other good things in place, but it takes you 8 months to get back up and running, you're gone. And that's why it's very important, not only with that side of it, but a company has to, it's like the three things I always say: urgency, transparency, and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, phase one is how well.
Equifax was not a big believer in any of those three. So.
None of those three. If one was writing a textbook on how to screw up, they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't, it's easy to point fingers at other companies when they mess up, but come on, sometimes it's so blatant that they deserve all the bad press they get. I don't know if you heard about Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong, but
Yes.
They were breached and had several million customer identities were stolen. They sat on that information. They didn't report for almost a year. And interestingly, the Hong Kong government was actually pursuing criminal charges against some of their security-related officers just for failing to report. But you imagine that there's the criminal liability, but then the damage to brand, not just outside the company, but inside the company. If you're working for an organization and you realize that all the employment records have been hacked. Anyway, you're not going to feel good if your company's keeping that secret from you or hidden from you.
Well, look at what happened with Uber. Now they're pursuing the former head of security of Uber, illegally, and I think that the authorities are involved too. Because of the fact that it wasn't reported, and it was they try to cover it up for a long period of time, which they feel now that under new management that would never have happened.
Yeah, another lesson learned there. Hey, Adam, I know we're running out of time here. Can I put you on the spot for a second?
Yeah, sure.
All right. I've read through your podcast description, and there's a reference to dad jokes.
Yes.
Can you share one with us?
Well, it's, anytime we talk about fishing, we immediately go into things about like scales and are we finished yet? Or it really depends on what the subject is. Each day there's a new opportunity to get involved in some kind of dad joke. The problem is I don't remember any one of them offhand.
That's all right. Cybersecurity is no laughing matter, but it can be funny sometimes. So that's okay.
Yeah. The point is that you need to open up and talk about it. And sometimes you need to relax in the process of opening up and talking about it. But also there are situations where you sit back at the 50,000 level and you go, how in heaven's name could anyone in the world have fallen for that? But yet all of us could totally fall for that, depending upon what else is going on in our lives. So you almost have to have a little bit of a laugh about it, going, did you really? I mean, really? And in some of the, in particular, the catfishing scams is how someone can go from they just meet you to they want to have your child, or they want you to have their child in a day and a half.
That doesn't happen to you all the time?
I didn't want to say that, but I'm a married man. But hey, it's a thing where it is amazing the kinds of things that people throw at people. To the tune of, oh, hi, we're Microsoft. We noticed there's a problem with your computer. Do you mind letting us in?
Right.
Or when you get a call from the bank and they say, and so Mark, so this is your credit card number, right? Yep. And this is your expiration date. Yep. Hey, listen, just to make sure you're you, could you flip it over and give us your security code? And then, yep.
Sure, Adam, here it is.
Yeah, you are a victim of a problem here, and tell you what, we're going to help you with the credit reporting agencies. Just give us your social security number.
Yeah, I've had the IRS call me before, quote unquote, the IRS, and say, there's an issue with your return, but before we can discuss it with you, we need to verify some information.
Yep.
And the smart ones, they're not going to come right out and ask you for your social security number. They're going to ask you to confirm your name, maybe your address, maybe your date of birth. Then they're going to build a little rapport with you, and then can you get the last four of your social security number? Okay, and then they'll go away, and then they'll come back, and sometimes I'll just play along because I want to see where they're going to go with this, right? But no, it's fun. So hey, Adam, again, I know we're running short on time. I really appreciate you coming on here, and I'm a big fan of What the Hack, and wish you the greatest success in the remainder of 2022. Last blurb here. Anything that you want to talk about in terms of future plans for What the Hack?
Well, the future plan really is that we're going to go to more days a week. It's just a question of when. I can hear already the groans from Bo and Travis, but because I think it's that big. It's just a question of having a reservoir of guests.
Yes.
But anytime you have an overflow of guests, send a few our way. We'll see what we can do.
I will definitely do that. Because I hate saying no to people. Again, I want to be as open to everybody as possible, but I have other things that I got to be doing in my life as well. So, hey, Adam, thanks again for coming on, and hope to cross paths with you someday soon.
Fantastic, and good luck with the tournament.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.